Hello and welcome to the worship service of Grace United Church in Wellsville, New York. We are so glad that you're joining us for worship today, and we hope that the service will inspire you to see Jesus in a new way and that you might know God's transforming power. Have you ever been to a very unusual wedding ceremony? In the mid-1990s, a Michigan woman, she thought out of the box, and she did something rather unique. You see, she worked at a 7-Eleven store. She loved her customers. She loved her work, and she loved her fiancé. So she decided to combine all three of these things. She decided to marry him at the 7-Eleven store on July 11th, 7-Eleven. It was quite a wedding. The bridal party lined up next to bags of chips and meat sticks and sodas. The good news was, at the reception, hot dogs and Slurpees were served at reduced prices. Can you imagine attending such a wedding? That was certainly a wedding not to be forgotten. Nowadays, people get married in all sorts of different and memorable places. In New Orleans, there was a wedding that was celebrated at the Pharmacy Museum. In Malibu, in California, family and friends perched on a mountaintop on the Rocky Oats Estate Vineyard. One pastor awaited the arrival of the wedding couple at the New Children's Museum in San Diego. Another couple wed and celebrated their beautiful day on a suspension bridge in Waco, Texas. What interesting places they picked to tie the knot. I am sure that these special weddings left an indelible memory in the minds of all of those people in attendance. Well, we're talking about weddings. How about barns? Now that's been quite a trend. Who of us has not been to a barn wedding? I've actually officiated one of those. Can you imagine all the amount of planning that goes into preparing for a wedding in such an unusual location? Getting married in a church, I think, has enough challenges of its own. Between the flowers and the tuxes, the microphones, the flower girl, the candles, and the grandmas, there's a lot to think about, and there is a lot that can go amiss. Mothers worry about these things. Fathers do too, I suppose, but it seems that the mothers put a lot of thought into the details of the wedding. You see, I think mothers want everything to go perfectly, or at least as perfectly as humanly possible. On the internet, they even sell mother of the bride and mother of the groom bags to help women stay organized. Now, if you've been to a wedding, you may have seen that these aren't the only bags. There are bags for the grandmother of the bride, and some for the grandmother of the groom. You can even get a great-grandmother bag. And of course, there are bags for the maid of honor and one for each bridesmaid. Sometimes you can even get their name monogrammed on it. People, especially women, tend to put a lot of time and energy thinking about, planning for, and pulling off the perfect wedding. Interesting or exotic weddings add another layer to the mayhem. People want to be remembered. They want it to be a spectacular day. But if truth be told, most weddings, as beautiful as they are, they're forgettable. Over time, you might not even remember for sure if you attended someone's wedding. But there are some that stand out in your mind. Jesus, his mother, and his friends attended such an unforgettable wedding at Cana. It was Cana. Now, Cana wasn't any place of note. It wasn't a wedding destination. It was just a dot on a map. But people remembered this wedding not because of its location, but because of what happened there. People are still talking about the wedding at Cana. Now, the wedding was probably just your typical, lovely, traditional Jewish wedding celebration. Maybe it was on a Tuesday, because faithful Jews believed that that day was doubly blessed. You remember in the first chapter of Genesis, it was on the third day of creation that upon looking at all of what was created 2 times, God, upon seeing this, God pronounced that it was good. And so, like Orthodox believers today, the big day may have been on a Tuesday. And like today, this young Jewish couple anticipated good things in store. Surrounded by family and friends, they celebrated their new beginning, their new life together. They were probably blissfully unaware, like most wedding couples are, that there was a problem in the wings. The wine was running out. It was a party, so to run out of wine before its time, that was an unforgettable hospitality indiscretion. Picture this stressed out host trying to find more wine while quietly badgering the servants. What are we going to do? Imagine the servants' anxiety and fear. It would have caused a humiliation for the host if the problem was not quickly resolved. It could have been a social disaster for them. Why were they short on wine, you might ask? Had they not sufficiently planned? Had their supplier run short? Were the people at the party drinking more than was customary? Was it because maybe unplanned guests had arrived and maybe crashed the party? We don't really know the answers to these questions, but for whatever reason, Mary, Jesus' mother, got involved in the wine problem. Now, she may have been related to the bride or groom, or they may have been a part of her extended family. Maybe, just maybe, she would have been one of those women who had a special canvas bag all her own, and so she felt somehow obligated to intervene. Or maybe not. Maybe Mary just loved a good party and didn't want to see anything go wrong. She thought that weddings should be fantastic celebrations that happen without a hitch. And she knew just the person who could help. So Mary asked Jesus to perform a miracle. She dropped a little hint to him and said, "They have no wine." Now, we don't really know what thoughts raced through Jesus' mind. Here he was, young, an unmarried young Jewish guy, and his mother asked him to provide more wine. He had just begun his ministry, but just barely. He hadn't been recognized in the community for any miracles or anything like that. He answered her, "Woman, what concern is it to you and to me? My hour has not come." This reply of Jesus to Mary can seem almost rude to us today, but very likely it wasn't. He actually spoke to her using a term of respect. Woman, meaning ma'am, or something similar to that. There's another time in the scripture when he refers to her in the same way. It's at the end of his ministry. In John chapter 19, it's recorded that when Jesus hung from the cross, he looked at his mother and he said to her, "Woman, behold your son." So here he was at the very, very beginning of his ministry. Remember that even though Jesus had been baptized before this, he had not entered into public ministry as of yet. He hadn't performed any miracles around town or in the community, and so people weren't following him, trying to get him to perform miracles. That would come later. He simply told her, "It isn't time yet for me to perform miracles." But now Mary, she didn't miss a beat. She hoped for the best. It's also very likely that she had good instincts about her son and what he just might do. Mary simply instructed the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." And then she leaves. She left Jesus to do whatever he would do. Interestingly, some people have noted that these are the last recorded words of Mary. Mary, the mother of Jesus. These are the last words that are recorded in the Bible. Do whatever he tells you. These are words well spoken, both to the servants and to us. And so the servants stood there awaiting instruction. Nearby stood large jars or jugs made of stone. These jugs had water for the participants' ritual cleaning. And so Jesus decides that he'll intervene. He demonstrates generosity. According to John, this is the first miracle he performs in public. He gives two brief commandments to the servants. First, he tells them, "Fill the pots or jars with water." Some say that this is a reflection of his care for these servants. The servants would have had to have been extremely strong or else had some really strong ropes to let down a jar into a well and pull it up full of water. But Jesus had compassion on them and simply said, "Fill the pots with water." And they did. Now, before we go on, I'd like to pause for just a moment to remember these unsung heroes, these servants who obeyed Jesus' requests. The celebrants had undoubtedly used the water from the pots, and they expected that they would be refilled and replenished over the course of the week as everyone celebrated this beautiful wedding together. Probably most of the event attenders barely took notice of the work required to fill the pots and to clean up after people used them. Yet without question, the servants went and they filled these pots. They responded when Jesus spoke to them. I wonder if these minor characters in the story can be a model for us. They're faithful to serve God where they could. They filled up these jars and filled them to the brim. Now what? Jesus then gave his second command. Take some to the chief steward of the feast. Again, they did so. And to their surprise, the chief steward said, "Everyone serves the good wine first, and then the inferior wine after the guests have become drunk. But you have kept the good wine until now." Certainly the guests, too, tasted this quality improvement. Customarily, you see, the better wine was served at first in a Galilean wedding, at a reception, and it makes sense. When you think about it, you serve the good wine first, and the palate is fresh and expectant, and after a few pints, well, who really cares? Both the guests and their taste buds are dull, and the cheap stuff, it can be brought out and nobody notices. Jesus' miracle was simple. Fill 6 large jars with water, dip a cup, take the cup to the wedding coordinator, let him taste it. And suddenly, there were up to 180 gallons of excellent wine. Now, what do you do with 180 gallons of excellent wine? That's a good question. I'm sure we can only imagine. That was no doubt enough wine for the rest of the reception and then some. That was one memorable event. It was memorable not because of where it was, but because of what happened there. Christians have held that this was the spot where Jesus performed his very first miracle. There he began his public ministry. And he did so with a great act of generosity. It was there where his disciples first believed in him. Jesus transformed water into wine, and it changed everything. It propelled Jesus into his ministry. He began his public ministry with a demonstration of God's generosity to the wedding crowd, even with a foreshadowing of things that would come. He gave of himself, changing the dynamic from despair and anxiety to one of joy and celebration of the fullness of life. One of my favorite Bible verses is from a few chapters later in this book of John. It's John 10:10. "I have come that you might have life and have it more abundantly." It's really one of my favorite life verses. I chose it in my early 20s when I was going through a very difficult time of illness. You see, at that time, I wasn't sure what kind of a life lay before me, what I would be able to do or to accomplish. I'd been seeing a doctor who didn't offer me much encouragement. But when I went to a new doctor, he told me, "You go live your life. Go on to graduate school. Get married if you want to, and have children if you want. Do whatever you want to do. We'll take care of your illness." Life, it was given back to me. So at that time in my life, when I read the verse, my heart was filled to the brim. Life abundantly. God had all kinds of things in store for me. I was transformed. Many people's lives are transformed by the generosity of God. One wife put it this way. After her alcoholic husband encountered the transforming power of the resurrected Christ, she said, Jesus changed beer into furniture. That is, money that had been spent on beer was now being spent on the family. Now for me, each day after that was a gift. It was an opportunity. That experience of despair transformed. It shaped the way I approached life. My cognizance of the beauty of life brought a sense of excitement and even urgency to living a life of purpose. Each birthday from then on has been a celebration, another milestone on the adventure. This story of the wedding in Cana is a story only found in the Gospel of John. It's not in the Synoptics. Believers over the centuries take note of it as the first of 7 miracles that point to the divinity of Jesus. Now, many sermons have been written about the details of this story. For example, there are sermons that are written about the dynamic between a mother and her son, or sermons written about the reticence of Jesus to jump in and do the miracle. Sermons about the importance of marriage vows, and on and on. But for me, this story is a story about God's extravagant generosity. Jesus came into a situation where there was great anxiety and despair, and he changed the whole dynamic. Now, I wonder in our lives where we might be struggling. Where might we feel despair? Where might we be worrying? Where might we have concerns about what other people might be thinking? Imagine Mary approaching us and saying, "Do whatever he says." What if you did it and you were just filled to the brim? It could just be the beginning of something phenomenal in your life. The wedding at Cana can be a metaphor for new transformational beginnings. How might the generosity of God in our lives change our future? Today, may we be open to Jesus' miraculous work in our lives. Amen.